Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and this is really the first kind of in-depth training as part of the intensive gardening mini-series that I'm doing. So today we're talking all about the one thing that you need to do to start your intensive garden off right. Are you ready? Grab a cup of tea or a cup of coffee because we're going to dig in. So first things first, right, we really need to get our soil right, especially for an intensive garden. Not just an organic garden, but an intensive garden has a lot more pressure that's going to be needed from our soil. And the soil is really important for intensive gardening because the soil feeds your garden, right? When we're growing a garden, we have to feed the soil to then feed ourselves, our family, our friends, our community. And the soil is what holds water and nutrients that your plants need to grow lush and abundantly in the garden, okay? And fertile soil makes your vegetables, herbs, and fruits taste so much better and have more vitamins and minerals in them, which help your body keep doing what it does best, and that's being you. And we really need fertile soil to keep providing these nutrients to the plants each year that you grow a garden. That's why if you've been listening to the podcast a while, you'll know that I'm always talking about, improving the soil and making sure that we're putting nutrients back into the soil using my favorite technique, which is composting. But let's talk a little bit about what a good soil for a garden actually is, because I want you to think of soil like you're making a sponge cake. There's main ingredients that you need for your cake like flour, butter, eggs, and sugar. And soil is kind of the same way, right? Soil's made up of bits of sand, silt, clay, maybe some rock and minerals in there, water, air, and organic matter called humus. However, you need these things together in the right quantities to help make your soil sponge cake, right? If you've got them in kind of different ratios, like if you're making a cake, it's not quite going to come out the way that you expect it to. Ask me, I mean, trust me, honestly, like, cake making or bread making have not been my forte, but I've been practicing a lot, and I'm really pleased to say that I've actually been able to make successful cakes and bread recently, so I'm very happy about that. But back to the soil, right? So good soil for a garden is often described as being loam, and this is where it's made of sand, silt, and clay. And it's ideal for most plants because it's got the right combination of these soil ingredients. So sand has large particles that provide space and also aeration, like air gaps, to the soil, which is good for your plant roots. Believe it or not, plant roots actually need oxygen even though they're in the ground. And silt, these are medium-sized particles that absorb moisture and help mix those larger sand particles and the smaller clay particles together. And then clay has the smallest particles, and they just love to stick together, which prevents oxygen from getting to the plant roots. But clay is jam-packed full of nutrients that your plants absolutely love. So if you have clay soil, I want you to love your clay soil, because growing on clay, once you've got kind of the drainage situation sorted, your garden is going to thrive. Like, I grew up learning how to grow on a clay soil. Now I live on a sandy soil. I really miss the clay. So, learn to love the soil that you have and know that you can actually improve the soil that you have. And, when it comes to garden soil, this loamy soil is like the perfect sponge cake for your plants. That's what organic gardeners are always striving for. And, we go into a lot more about how to improve soil in the Grow Your Own Food Academy. So I know many of you listeners are part of the academy, and you guys know that the information is in there. But let's talk a little bit about why loam is actually a good soil for growing. Because loam soils have that right balance of air from the sand particles that create in the space, nutrient retention from the clay, because clay's got lots of nutrients in it, and also moisture retention from both the clay and the silt. So they both help to hold on to that water. And as a result, loam soils allow water to drain through fast enough so it doesn't become waterlogged like in a heavy clay soil, but slow enough that plants have access to the moisture when they need it. Whereas if you've got a sandy soil, like, water just runs through it like super fast, like quicker than a whippet with a bum full of dynamite. It is gone. But that's one of the beautiful things about having a garden, especially a organic garden, is you can improve the soil and then see how not only the soil changes, but your garden does too. So you might be thinking to yourself, do I even have loamy soil? How do I know? Well, there's an old gardener's trick for testing your soil, and my granddad always told me it was called the bowl test. So that's what I know it as, is the bowl test. So what you do is you pick up a handful of slightly damp soil and you want to squeeze it into a bowl and then open up your hand and see what the soil does. So if your soil has not formed a bowl, then you've got sandy soil. If your soil did form a bowl, that's great. Now you need to poke it with your finger and apply some pressure to it. If the bowl crumbles and breaks, then you've got loamy soil. If the bowl doesn't break, or you kind of smear it across your hand, or you can mold it into another shape, then it's likely that you've got clay soil. And it's this loamy soil, remember, what organic gardeners are always aiming for when they're using intensive gardening. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about how to change your garden to an intensive garden, because it has a lot to do with the soil. And really, to get that intensive garden off to the right start, then you really need to build your beds right, and you need to get that soil sponge cake going, right? And the best way to do this is to take years of traditional gardening experience, what people have done time and time again, right? It's worked a lot over hundreds of years, and it is to do double digging. And double digging is good for a couple of reasons. So it helps you clean up the beds because you can see weed roots as you dig. You can pull them out as you go. So if you have persistent weeds like bindweed or Bermuda grass or whatever, crabgrass, those kind of things that are an absolute pain in the butt to get out, then double digging helps you actually clean that up because you can pull out more of those roots and it becomes less of a problem. Digging also helps to improve aeration and drainage, and you can add organic matter at the same time to your soil. So double digging is the number one thing that you're going to need to do in each one of your garden beds. But here's the good thing: after you do that one dig, that one double dig, you're not going to need to do it again. So let's talk about what double digging is, because you might not be aware. And okay, I'm not going to lie. Double digging garden beds is really hard work. I know. It was a job that my grandparents had me doing at the garden and on the allotment as a kid. But I actually found after a while that I really enjoyed doing it. And even now, like, even though I'm overweight and, I'm trying to get healthier, I actually really enjoy double digging and stuff still. And there's a real sense of achievement that you get after you've dug over your garden bed. Like, you see that nice slight mound that you've made, and, you're kind of thinking about the possibilities of what your garden will grow until your neighbor looks over the fence and asks if you've buried a body back there. But, there is a big sense of relief after you've finished all your double digging of the beds, because it is a lot of hard work. And ultimately, double digging is basically a way to prepare that soil deep down. And double digging is where you're going to be digging the soil 20 to 24 inches deep, and you're basically digging it over twice. That's why it's called double digging. But let me break it down for you step by step. So first of all, you want to get yourself a sharp spade or a shovel. If you've got one, make sure it's sharp, because that's going to make things so much easier, because it's going to be able to cut through the soil. So grab your spade or shovel and dig a trench out about 10 to 12 inches deep down. So that's usually like a couple of goes with the actual shovel into the trench. But you want to make it as wide as the width of your shovel. You don't want to make it too wide, so you're not going to be like overreaching, and you don't want it to be too narrow, so you can't actually get stuff out of the trench. So go ahead and dig a trench down about 10 to 12 inches deep. But you want to be digging out the soil from this trench. So dig it out with your shovel and move it onto like a tarp or a wheelbarrow, something that you can move it easily afterwards, because you're going to need to save it. And well done. on making your first trench there. Now you want to grab a garden fork and you want to dig down inside that trench another 10 to 12 inches. And you want to be using that garden fork to turn the soil over inside of the trench. Don't dig out that soil again. Keep it in the trench. And this is a really good time to add some organic matter into your trench. Some people use compost, other people use well-rotted manure, other people just add in vegetable and garden scraps that are going to become compost and add it in at that point. But either way, you want to be adding some organic matter into the trench and turn it all over, mix it up with that garden fork in the trench. Again, you don't want to be digging it out, you want to keep it in the trench. So next, you want to grab your trusty shovel again, like you're going to become best friends with your shovel and your garden fork. So it's important to invest in good quality ones that are not going to hurt your hands and ones that are lightweight enough for you to maneuver. But grab your trusty shovel and you want to step backwards on the garden bed and dig a new trench as wide as the width of your shovel. And same thing, you want to be digging down about 10 to 12 inches. But rather than putting that soil that you're digging out into your wheelbarrow or your tarp, move it into that first trench that you created. So you're just kind of plopping that soil straight into the trench where you've just added your organic material and stuff. And that's it. You want to keep doing that, always stepping backwards from your garden bed and just placing that soil from the new trench that you're digging, the stuff that you're digging out, into the trench before, and keep doing that all the way across your bed. And then when you get to the end and you've obviously backfilled your trench, you're probably left still with a trench with some organic matter that you've just dug in. What do I do about that? Well, if you remember the soil that you dug out from the first trench in the wheelbarrow or on the top, you want to grab that and move it over and use that to fill in your final trench. And then, sit back, relax, enjoy a nice cup of tea or whatever is your poison because you've earned it. Now, there's a couple of tips for successful double digging that I have learned digging many a trench on the allotment and in the garden. So my first tip is to go slow. And if you're like me and you're kind of out of shape, this is pretty important, is to, take it easy and take it slow. And, work in those cooler parts of the day, because that's going to be easier on you, because you're going to get warm as you're doing the labor anyway. But also, we don't want to be working in, those overly hot conditions. And same, you kind of want to be digging this kind of stuff in the cooler parts of the year, whether it's fall or spring, before you start planting. You want to take your time doing this. Always use a sharp shovel or a spade. It is going to make things 10 times easier to do, rather than you trying to jam a dull edged or blunt shovel into the earth. This is especially important if you've got a heavy soil that's got a lot of clay in there. My fourth tip will be, don't try to lift too much earth and soil at once. Smaller shovelfuls are so much better on your back. And you can take breaks. Taking breaks is fine. Taking breaks is good. And that's why, my number one tip is to go slow, because you don't want to hurt yourself. Because if you hurt yourself doing this, then, you're not going to be able to get out in your garden and do the things that you want to be doing, right? Like the planting and the harvesting and all that kind of fun stuff. So go slow, don't try to lift too much. And stepping backwards each time that you're digging a new trench is meaning that you're not going to be standing on the soil and recompacting it again and ruining all of your, sweat, tears and hard work. It also means that you're not going to be overreaching when you're filling that trench either, because you're not going to be sort of reaching over to get everything back in there without stepping on all of your hard work. If you're working in a wide area, then consider making your garden beds smaller. And really, you don't want your garden beds to be wider than 6 feet. And that's so you can reach in from both sides of the bed. A little smaller is often better for many people, like no more than 5 feet, because then you can kind of stand over them and you have less of a reach. But I wouldn't go more than 6 feet. Also enlist help from family and friends. There's no shame in that. I mean, it's good exercise for everybody, but it also means that you can take breaks and you can still continue with the task and get the job done. But my last tip is don't be afraid to do a little at the time, and, don't worry about trying to conquer the entire garden in a day. If you can only do half a bed of double digging, then that's great. You've made some real awesome progress. Maybe the next day or the next week you finish that bed, and you have that one good to go, and you just kind of work through each garden bed as you get the chance. But remember, we're only doing this double digging activity once to set up the garden beds. And in some of the other trainings that we're going to be doing, because we're going to be talking about, the plant spacing and open pollinated seeds, composting, cover crops, and integrated pest management, all of these other aspects of an intensive garden that are really going to help your garden grow. But this is a good way to help improve that soil from the get-go, and then we're just kind of adding fertility, and we're going to let nature do the work after this point. So I did mention adding fertility, and one of the things that you are going to need to do is adding humus and organic matter to the soil. Now, obviously, as I was giving you the breakdown of how to do the double digging, you might remember that I said that when you've dug that trench that you want to be putting in some organic matter at that point, whether it is well-rotted manure or well-rotted compost, or you're creating a compost trench, whatever it is that you are going to be putting in there, that is a great time to put it in, because then it's kind of closer to that subsoil level, and it is kind of like a way to attract more worms and things and other flora and fauna that live in the soil to that garden space, because you're providing them with an all-you-can-eat Vegas buffet that's right there for them to come and enjoy. But what we want to do is we want to add a bit more humus and organic matter to the soil that's going to be kind of closer to the top, so that when you are transplanting your plants, that they've got a nice all-you-can-eat Vegas buffet to help get them started as well, because that's the important thing. We want to be encouraging more like microorganisms and worms and things like that into our soil, because they're going to be helping break things down into smaller and smaller pieces that the plants can then use. And that's where like a really good organic soil kind of comes into its own, because it has this great diversity of microorganisms and things that are in the soil that are going to help your garden thrive. Now, humus is basically things that were once living and that are breaking down. So it's like the compost stuff. It's that dark, crumbly material that you might see when you are working with a really good quality soil. And organic matter in the soil actually helps to retain water, and it provides nutrients for your plants to grow. Now, if you don't know how to compost, I've definitely done a couple of episodes on the podcast about composting, but you can also check out some resources on my website, like how to get composting in a small garden, and I will make sure that is in the show notes. But really, the best way to get your intensive gardening beds off to this great start after you've done all this hard work of double digging is to spread 4 inches of mature or well rotted or cured compost, whatever you want to call it. It's stuff that is finished composting over the newly dug garden beds, right? And then we want to rake those garden beds. So they still want to have a little bit of a mound, but then they want to be flat on the top so it's easy for you to plant into. And at that point, you are ready to get planting. So there's like I said, a bit of hard work that's got to go up at the beginning. But what's the payoff of you spending the time doing this double digging? You're going to have a garden that's going to go off like the clappers. It is going to take off and it is going to thrive because it's got the nutrients that your garden and your plants are going to need. And that's going to be a real benefit because a healthy soil means a healthy garden, which means healthier plants, and plants are able to cope much better with things like pests and diseases, as well as be more nutritious for you. So I want to know from you, what is it that you are going to be adding into your compost and into the trenches that you're digging for your double digging garden beds as you're moving over to an intensive garden? Let me know in the Facebook group. I would love to hear from you and see how your gardens are getting on. And I love to hear about what's going on your homestead. So take a look at the Facebook group, click the link that's in the podcast description. And until next time, I hope your garden grows beautifully. And we're going to be talking all about plant spacing in the next episode.